happy December 1st. Happy December 1st, 1862. We're going to go back in 1862. It's actually 2018, right? Of course. But I want to talk about Abraham Lincoln. I want to do the State of the Union address that he did. He gave it out on December 1st. So this would be the second year he was in office. Also 1 year into the Civil War. 1 of 4 years. And so the whole world, everybody, all the Americans, everybody be paying attention to this because all the war and bloodshed, right? You had, what, 10, 30,000 people dying per hour, per day in Gettysburg. So 500,000 Americans were killed in the so-called Civil War. It's very bloody. So it's not that civil. If we could look at a Civil War and say, you know what? That's civil. Anyways, it was a revolutionary war. It changed absolutely everything. So I'm just going to read this verbatim for as long as this battery lasts. So just to get a clear-cut, just an understanding of Abraham Lincoln that I understand, he's the only person in history that freed the slaves. There's only like one other fucking person, so it's like only 2 people I know, but the other person I don't even know. So Abraham Lincoln's the only fucking historical person, some person back in the, fucking Roman or Greek days or some shit. So he's the only person that freed the slaves. He did it to save the Union. It was a political measure. He didn't start the Civil War out as beginning to, abolish slavery, but the main issue for the war and for the secession, the rebellion, the main point of the rebellion, the main differences between the North and the South was that the North did not want to extend slavery into the new territories, whereas the South did. So it was all about slavery. Every fucking bit of it was about slavery. All the declarations of all the independences of all the different states was all about slaves. So slavery was the big thing. And, historically, Lincoln's right. Could he have done it a nicer way? Yeah, sure, but fuck slavery, you pieces of shit. I mean, it was held by violence, so to be liberated by violence. There's 100,000 Kentuckians that fought in this war, and 75% fought for the Union. So most Kentuckians, 2/3 of all the white Kentuckians who fought in the Civil War, fought for the right side. So even though Kentucky went ahead and seceded after the Civil War, they picked the right side. The best, the most, the happiest, the greatest, the Kentuckians, the Americans that I associate the most with during the Civil War would be the 25,000 black soldiers who were liberated. So Abraham Lincoln's armies liberated all these black folks. Where were they supposed to go, even though 3 states had held on, the border states, right, Maryland, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Or no, not West Virginia. West Virginia went to the Union, so it was Maryland, Missouri, I don't know, it's Kentucky, Maryland, and something else. So there's 3 border states, so they were Union states who had slavery. So they're going to get fucked, but, essentially it was pretty clear-cut and dry if you're on which side of the Mason-Dixon line. So Abraham Lincoln was born in Kentucky. He said, we must have Kentucky. We can only hope to have God on our side, but we must have Kentucky if we're going to win this thing. He left when he was 9 years old, went to Indiana, then went to Illinois, but he grew up in Kentucky. He was a child of Kentucky. His dad lost land in Kentucky. His great-grandfather got shot by a Shawnee, Abraham Lincoln. So, yeah, even though he wasn't against slavery, eventually history pushes him into the spot. He becomes, the savior of the slaves. And I feel fucking great as fuck, to be honest with you. It's one of the holy wars. Howard Zinn said they're the 3 holy wars. And even though the Revolution I have a lot more problems with, the World War II and the Civil War, I am so fucking on board with this shit. Going around killing a bunch of Confederate pieces of shit that was against the United States of America, against the Union. So, yeah, I'm going to read. This is Abraham Lincoln's State of the Union Address, December 1st, 1862. Verbatim. Abraham Lincoln, December 1st, 1862. Fellow citizens of the Senate and House of Representatives, since your last annual assembling, another year of health and bountiful harvest has passed, and while it has not pleased the Almighty to bless us with the return of peace, we can but press on, guided by the best light He gives us, trusting that in His own good time and wise way all will yet be well. The correspondence touching foreign affairs, which has taken place during the last year, is herewith submitted in virtual compliance with a request to that effect made by the House of Representatives near the close of the last session of Congress. If the condition of our relations with other nations is less gratifying than it has usually been at former periods, it is certainly more satisfactory than a nation so unhappily distracted as we might reasonably have apprehended. In the month of June last, there were some grounds to expect that the maritime powers, which at the beginning of our domestic difficulties so unwisely and unnecessarily, as we think, recognized the insurgents as a belligerent, would soon recede from that position, which has proved only less injurious to themselves than to our own country. But the temporary reverses, which afterwards befell the national arms and which were exaggerated by our own disloyal citizens abroad, have hitherto delayed that act of simple justice. The Civil War, which has so radically changed for the moment the occupations and habits of the American people, has necessarily disturbed the social condition and affected very deeply the prosperity of the nations with which we have carried on a commerce that has been steadily increasing throughout a period of half a century. It has, at the same time, excited political ambitions and apprehensions which have produced a profound agitation throughout the civilized world. In this unusual agitation, we have forborne from taking part in any controversy between foreign states and between parties or factions in such states. We have attempted no propagandism and acknowledged no revolution, but we have left to every nation the exclusive conduct and management of its own affairs. Our struggle has been, of course, contemplated by foreign nations with reference less to its own merits than to its supposed and often exaggerated effects and consequences resulting to those nations themselves. Nevertheless, complaint on the part of this government, even if it were just, would certainly be unwise. The treaty with Great Britain for the suppression of the slave trade has been put into operation with a good prospect of complete success. It is an occasion of special pleasure to acknowledge that the execution of it on the part of Her Majesty's government has been marked with a jealous respect for the authority of the United States and the rights of their moral and loyal citizens. The convention with Hanover for the abolition of the state dues has been carried into full effect under the Act of Congress for that purpose. A blockade of 3,000 miles of seacoast could not be established and rigorously enforced in a season of great commercial activity like the present without committing occasional mistakes and inflicting unintentional injuries upon foreign nations and their subjects. A civil war occurring in a country where foreigners reside and carry on trade under treaty stipulations is necessarily fruitful of complaints of the violation of neutral rights. All such collisions tend to excite misapprehensions and possibly to produce mutual reclamations between nations which have a common interest in preserving peace and friendship. In clear cases of these kinds, I have so far as possible heard and redressed complaints which have been presented by friendly powers. There is still, however, a large and an augmenting number of doubtful cases upon which the government is unable to agree with the governments whose protection is demanded by the claimants. I don't know who he's talking about or what he's talking about here. There are, moreover, many cases in which the United States or their citizens suffer wrongs from the naval or military authorities of foreign nations which the governments of those states are not at once prepared to address. I have proposed to some of the foreign states thus interested in mutual conventions to examine and adjust such complaints. This proposition has been made especially to Great Britain, to France, to Spain, and to Prussia. In each case it has been kindly received, but it has not yet been formally adopted. I deem it my duty to recommend an appropriation in behalf of the owners of the Norwegian bark Admiral P. Tordenskiold, P. Tor, some Norwegian bark, which vessel was in May 1861 prevented by the commander of the blockading force off Charleston from leaving that port with cargo, notwithstanding a similar privilege had surely before been granted to an English vessel. I have directed the Secretary of State to cause the papers in the case to be communicated to the proper committees. Applications have been made to me by many free Americans of African descent to favor their immigration with a view to such colonization as was contemplated in recent acts of Congress. Other parties, at home and abroad, some from interested motives, others upon patriotic considerations, and still others influenced by philanthropic sentiments, have suggested similar measures, while on the other hand, several of the Spanish American republics have protested against the sending of such colonies to the respective territories. Under these circumstances, I decline to move any such colony to any state without first obtaining the consent of its government, with an agreement on its part to receive and protect such immigrants and all the rights of free men. And I have at the same time offered to the several states situated within the tropics or having colonies there to negotiate with them, subject to the advice and consent of the Senate, to favor the voluntary immigration of persons of that class to the respective territories upon conditions which shall be equal, just, and humane. Liberia and Haiti are as yet the only countries to which colonists of African descent from here could go with certainty of being received and adopted as citizens. And I regret to say such persons contemplating colonization do not seem so willing to migrate to those countries as to some others, nor so willing as I think their interest demands. I believe, however, opinion among them in this respect is improving, and that ere long there will be an augmented and considerable migration to both these countries from the United States. The new commercial treaty between the United States and the Sultan of Turkey has been carried into execution. A commercial and consular treaty has been negotiated subject to the Senate's consent with Liberia, and a similar negotiation is now pending with the Republic of Haiti. A considerable improvement of the national commerce is expected to result from these measures. Our relations with Great Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, Russia, Prussia, Denmark, Sweden, Austria, the Netherlands, Italy, Rome, and the other European states remain undisturbed. Very favorable relations also continue to be maintained with Turkey, Morocco, China, and Japan. During the last year, there has not only been no change of our previous relations with the independent states of our own continent, but more friendly sentiments than have heretofore existed are believed to be entertained by these neighbors whose safety and progress are so intimately connected with our own. This statement especially applies to Mexico, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Honduras, Peru, and Chile. The Commission under the Convention with the Republic of New Granada closed its session without having audited and passed upon all the claims which were submitted to it. A proposition is pending to revive the Convention that it may be able to do more complete justice. The Joint Commission between the United States and the Republic of Costa Rica has completed its labors and submitted its report. I have favored the project for connecting the United States with Europe by an Atlantic telegraph, and a similar project to extend the telegraph from San Francisco to connect by a Pacific telegraph with the line which is being extended across the Russian Empire. The territories of the United States, with unimportant exceptions, have remained undisturbed by the Civil War. They are exhibiting such evidence of prosperity as justifies an expectation that some of them will soon be in a condition to be organized as states and be constitutionally admitted into the federal union. Like Colorado, no Civil War battles happened in Colorado. Colorado would become a state within 12 years after the Civil War. The immense mineral resources of some of those territories ought to be developed as rapidly as possible. Every step in that direction would have a tendency to improve the revenues of the government and diminish the burdens of the people. It is worthy of your serious consideration whether some extraordinary measures to promote that end cannot be adopted. The means which suggests itself as most likely to be effective is a scientific exploration of the mineral regions in those territories with a view to the publication of its results at home and in foreign countries, results which cannot fail to be auspicious. The condition of the finances will claim your most diligent consideration. The vast expenditures incident to the military and naval operations required for the suppression of the rebellion have hitherto been met with the promptitude and certainty unusual in similar circumstances, and the public credit has been fully maintained. The continuance of the war, however, and the increased disbursements made necessary by the augmented forces now in the field demand your best reflections as to the best modes of providing the necessary revenue without injury to business and with the least possible burdens upon labor. The suspension of specie payments by the banks soon after the commencement of your last session made large issues of United States notes unavoidable. The greenbacks. He's starting to print money, right? The greenbacks. Lincoln printed money. He had land reform. He changed the whole fucking game. You cannot go. This is revolutionary. This is the second American Revolution. In no other way could the payment of the troops and the satisfaction of other just demands be so economically or so well provided for. The judicious legislation of Congress securing the receivability of these notes for loans and internal duties and making them a legal tender for other debts has made them an universal currency and has satisfied, partially at least and for the time, the long-felt want of a uniform circulating medium, saving thereby to the people immense sums and discounts and exchanges. A return to specie payments, however, at the earliest period, compatible with due regard to all interest concerned, should ever be kept in view. Fluctuations in the value of currency are always injurious, and to reduce these fluctuations to the lowest possible point will always be a leading purpose in wise legislation. Convertibility, prompt and certain convertibility into coin is generally acknowledged to be the best and surest safeguard against them, and it is extremely doubtful whether a circulation of United States notes payable in coin and sufficiently large for the wants of the people can be permanently, usefully, and safely maintained. Is there, then, any other mode in which the necessary provision for the public wants can be made and the great advantages of a safe and uniform currency secured? I know of none which promises so certain results and is at the same time so unobjectionable as the organization of banking associations under a general act of Congress well guarded to its provisions. To such associations, the government might furnish circulating notes on the security of United States bonds deposited in the Treasury. These notes, prepared under supervision of proper officers, being uniform in appearance and security and convertible always into coin, would at once protect labor against the evils of a vicious currency and facilitate commerce by cheap and safe exchanges. A moderate reservation from the interest on the bonds would compensate the United States for the preparation and distribution of the notes and a general supervision of the system, and would lighten the burden of that part of the public debt employed as securities. The public credit, moreover, would be greatly improved, and the negotiation of new loans greatly facilitated by the steady market demand for government bonds which the adoption of the proposed system would create. It is an additional recommendation of the measure of considerable weight in my judgment that it would reconcile as far as possible all existing interests by the opportunity offered to existing institutions to reorganize under the Act, substituting only the secured uniform national circulation for the local and various circulations, secured and unsecured, now issued by them. The receipts into the Treasury from all sources, including loans and balance from the previous year for the fiscal year ending on 30th June 1862, were $583.8 million, of which some $49 million were derived from customs, $1.8 million from direct tax from public lands, $152,000 from miscellaneous sources, $931,787.64 from loans in all forms, $529 million. The remainder, $2.3 million, was the balance from last year. The disbursements during the same period were for congressional, executive, and judicial purposes, $5.9 million for foreign intercourse, $1.3 million for miscellaneous expenses, including the mints, loans, post office deficiencies, post office deficiencies, collection of revenue, and other like charges. $14.1 million for expenses under the Interior Department, $985.52. Under the War Department, $394 million. Under the Navy Department, $42.6 million for interest on public debt, $13.2 million, and for payment of public debt, including reimbursement of temporary loan and redemptions, $96 million, making an aggregate of $570 million, and leaving a balance in the Treasury on the first day of July, 1862, of $13 million. It should be observed that the sum of $96 million expended for reimbursements and redemption of public debt, being included also in the loans made, may be properly deducted both from receipts and expenditures, leaving the actual receipts for the year $487 million and the expenditures $474.7 million. Other information on the subject of finances will be found in the report of the Secretary of the Treasury, to whose statements and views I invite your most candid and considered attention. The reports of the Secretaries of War and of the Navy are herewith transmitted. These reports, though lengthy, are scarcely more than brief abstracts of the very numerous and extensive transactions and operations conducted through those departments, nor could I give a summary of them here upon any principle which would admit of its being much shorter than the reports themselves. I therefore content myself with laying the reports before you and asking your attention to them. It gives me pleasure to report a decided improvement in the financial condition of the Post Office Department as compared with several preceding years. The receipts for the fiscal year 1861 amounted to $8.3 million, which embraced the revenue from all the states of the Union for 3/4 of that year, notwithstanding the cessation of revenue from the so-called seceded states during the last fiscal year. The increase of the correspondence of the loyal states have been sufficient to produce a revenue during the same year of $8.3 million, being only $50,000 less than was derived from all the states of the Union during the previous year. So, you didn't lose no money. Getting rid of all them southern states, America is still making a shit ton of money. Less. Right, okay, the expenditures show a still more favorable result. The amount expended in 1861 was $13.6 million for the last year. The amount has been reduced to $11.1 million, showing a decrease of about $2.5 million in the expenditures as compared with the preceding year, and about $3.7 million as compared with the fiscal year 1860. The deficiency in the department for the previous year was $4.5 million. For the last fiscal year, is reduced to $2.1 million. These favorable results are in part owing to the cessation of mail service in the insurrectionary states, and in part to a careful review of all expenditures in that department in the interest of economy. The efficiency of the Postal Service, it is believed, has also been much improved. The Postmaster General has also opened that correspondence through the Departments of State with foreign governments, proposing a constitution of postal representatives for the purpose of simplifying the rates of foreign postage and to expedite the foreign mails. This proposition, equally important to our adopted citizens and to the commercial interests of this country, have been favorably entertained and agreed to by all the governments from whom replies have been received. I ask the attention of Congress to the suggestions of the Postmaster General in his report respecting the further legislation required, in his opinion, for the benefit of the Postal Service. The Secretary of the Interior reports as follows in regard to the public lands. The public lands have ceased to be a source of revenue from the 1st July 1861 to the 30th September 1862. The entire cash receipts from the sale of lands were $137,000, 26 cents, a sum much less than the expenses of our land system during the same period. The Homestead Law, the revolutionary Homestead Law, 160 acres for anybody who can fill out an application, will take effect on the 1st of January next, the same time when the Emancipation Proclamation is entered into record. So the emancipation is entered into record. The homestead is written into record. Offers such inducements to settlers that sales for cash cannot be expected to an extent sufficient to meet the expenses of the General Land Office and the cost of surveying and bringing the land into market. The discrepancy between the sum here stated as arising from the sales of the public lands and the sum derived from the same source as reported from the Treasury Department arises, as I understand, from the fact that the periods of time, though apparently were not really coincident at the beginning point, the Treasury report, including a considerable sum now, which had previously been reported from the interior, sufficiently large to greatly overreach the sum derived from the 3 months now reported upon by the interior and not by the Treasury. The Indian tribes upon our frontiers have, during the past year, manifested a spirit of insubordination and at several points have engaged in open hostility against the white settlements in their vicinity. The tribes occupying the Indian country south of Kansas, renounced their allegiance to the United States and entered into treaties with the insurgents. Those who remained loyal to the United States were driven from the country. The chief of the Cherokees has visited this city for the purpose of restoring the former relations of the tribe with the United States. He alleges that they were constrained by superior force to enter into treaties with the insurgents and that the United States neglected to furnish the protection which their treaty stipulations required. In the month of August last, the Sioux Indians in Minnesota attacked the settlements in their vicinity with extreme ferocity, killing indiscriminately men, women, and children. This attack was wholly unexpected and therefore no means of defense had been prodded. It is estimated that not less than 800 persons were killed by the Indians and a large amount of property was destroyed. How this outbreak was induced is not definitely known, and suspicions which may be unjust need not be stated. Information was received by the Indian Bureau from different sources about the time hostilities were commenced that a simultaneous attack was to be made upon the white settlements by all the tribes between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. The state of Minnesota has suffered great injury from this Indian war. Large portion of her territory has been depopulated, and a severe loss has been sustained by the destruction of property. The people of that state, Minnesota, manifest much anxiety for the removal of the tribes beyond the limits of the state as a guarantee against future hostility. The Commissioner of Indian Affairs will furnish full details. I submit for your special consideration whether our Indian system shall not be remodeled. Many wise and good men have impressed me with the belief that this can be profitably done. I think he's going to hang 37 people, the largest mass hanging in U.S. history of those Sioux Indians in Minnesota. I submit a statement of the proceedings of commissioners which shows the progress that has been made in the enterprise of constructing the Pacific Railroad. One quick thing, he said Liberia and Haiti would take in the slaves. The colony in Haiti actually turned out to be a farce, and the guy just put them right back into slavery. So actually only Liberia was the only country, not Haiti. But he's going to try right at the end of the year to try that Haitian colony to see if that's a plausible solution to ship them back to Haiti. Right. So ship them back to Africa because that's a compromise between the the racist, the white supremacist, and the abolitionist. I submit a statement of the proceedings of the commissioners which shows the progress has been made in the enterprise of constructing the Pacific Railroad. And this suggests the earliest completion of this road and also the favorable action of Congress upon the projects now pending before them for enlarging the capacities of the great canals in New York and Illinois as being of a vital and rapidly increasing importance to the whole nation, especially to the vast interior region here and after to be noticed at some greater length. I purpose having prepared and laid before you at an early day some interesting and valuable statistical information upon this subject. The military and commercial importance of enlarging the Illinois and Michigan Canal and improving the Illinois River is presented in the report. Colonel Webster to the Secretary of War and now transmitted to Congress. I respectfully ask attention to it. To carry out the provisions of the Act of Congress of the 15th of May last, I have caused the Department of Agriculture of the United States to be organized. So he organized the Department of Agriculture, the The Commissioner informs me that within the period of a few months, this department has established an extensive system of correspondence and exchanges, both at home and abroad, which promises to effect highly beneficial results in the development of a correct knowledge of recent improvements in agriculture and the introduction of new products and in the collection of the agricultural statistics of the different states. Also, it will soon be prepared to distribute largely seeds, cereals, plants, and cuttings, and has already published and liberally diffused much valuable information in anticipation of a more elaborate report, which will in due time be furnished, embracing some valuable tests in chemical science now in progress in the laboratory.